Hi, everyone. I'm Barb from Book Club Mom, and I'm really excited today because I'm doing something special. I have a guest with me today. It's Ritu Bhathal, who is a poet and an author of two novels, Marriage Unarranged and Straight as a Jalebi. Am I saying that right? Yes.
Yes, you are indeed. Yes.
So great. And in addition to being a poet and an author, Ritu is also a teacher. And she runs a blog where she shares her journey as a writer. And so I've been internet friends with Ritu for, I don't even know, how did we connect? Do you remember?
I can't even remember how, but I remember sending you Marriage Unarranged when I first published it. So it's been a good 3 or 4 years.
I think so. Yeah. But we connect on a lot of different platforms. So I recently read Marriage Unarranged and Straight as a Jalebi, and so I reached out to Ritu to see if she wanted to do an interview. This is something new that I'm trying, and she said yes. So here we are today. So welcome. Very
Thank
excited to have you here.
thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, sure. So as I said, in addition to being an author and a poet, you're a teacher. So tell me how you became a writer and how you manage these demanding roles.
Oh my goodness me, how do I firstly I wish I could have a clone machine. That would be fantastic. Um I've always loved reading and writing stories, all of that sort of side of life. It's been something that's been with me since I was tiny, but I never thought about writing a book initially. I always wanted to teach. That was something that I think I've wanted to do since I was 6.
Mm.
And yeah, so obviously I went ahead and did my qualifications for that. And I think something just was eating away at me about wanting to write something. And then you have that old adage people pull around, saying, we've all got a book in us, everyone has a book in them. Well, maybe there is that book in me. And just before I got married, I started formulating a little story. I had no idea how to write a book. It was just a case of, hey, I've got a computer, I'll open Word and let's go. No idea about planning, how to think about characters, story arcs, none of that really figured into it. And then I forgot about it for a while because life gets in the way.
Mhm.
And it was not long after my kids were both born, and a friend of mine started a blog. She suffered from depression, so somebody had told her journaling or sort of chronicling how she feels might be a really good thing. So she put this link out on Facebook and said, I've started this blog. It's quite personal, but I'm putting it out there. Anybody want to read? So I clicked on it, read, and I thought, oh, I want to write a comment, just to be supportive. And
Mhm.
it was on WordPress, and WordPress said after a little while, they sent an email, said, oh, why not start a blog? I didn't even really know what a blog was, if I'm honest with you. I had
Yeah.
no plan for it, that this was going to be a blog about X, Y, or Z. It was just okay. So I started this thing called But I Smile With Me, Smile
Mhm.
Anyway, because that was the first name that came to my mind, and I generally smile quite a lot all the time. So it was a given, and it was literally a bunch of randomness that started that. But through that randomness, I began to build a community of friends on the blog, and within those friends, I was a lot of writers and authors, and they kind of reawoke this urge to write again. And I found my old story that I'd started. I ended up putting some chapters on it on my blog
Oh,
to
you
get to,
did. Oh, okay.
so probably the first 6 or 7 chapters I did it sort of a bit of a serialization, like, I've written this, I haven't written any more yet, but would you be interested if I was to continue writing this story? And I got some really lovely feedback,
Mhm.
and that's where the push to actually start or finish the story came. And that was a long time ago. So it took, I'd say, about 18 years for me to actually write that. But that's on and off, a lot of on and off time. And then I went through the process of trying to find an agent or somebody to publish it first. And I was getting lots of very lovely, what I'd like to call positive rejections. You know,
Right.
maybe not the right thing for us at the moment, but a really lovely idea, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought to myself, do you know what? I'm in my 40s now. And why should I wait for somebody else to validate me? If I think I've got it, and if I get enough support from the people who I trust, opinion wise, I'm just going to go for it myself. And that's what I did. So I ended up self-publishing, because I thought, if I don't do that, I might just be sitting here with this manuscript waiting and nothing will ever happen. And then, of course, COVID happened. So that kind of put a bit of a spanner in the works.
Yeah.
But equally, what I did do and how much I did promote it and the success that came from doing that myself, I started writing a second book, because the characters don't shut up. So it's part of the same series, and
Yes.
there were others who wanted to be part of a new story, and they wanted their story told, I had every intention of self-publishing that, but that's when I got approached by a publisher myself
For the
and they
second book. Is that
yeah, well, they loved the first one and said, we hear you've got a couple of others under your belt or on planned.
Mhm.
I'd love to relaunch by republishing your first one and then publishing the second.
Oh, okay.
And,
So that's how that came about.
yeah, so they relaunched the first one, knowing I hadn't finished writing the second one. And then when Straight as Jalebi came out, obviously we had a bit of a deadline. It's the first time I've written to a deadline, which is also a bit weird.
Yes.
But still, it was easy because I'd already written a lot of it under my own steam. And now I'm in the process of writing the third one, which is part of their contract, a 3-book contract I had with them.
And there's a little teaser of that at the end of your second book, which
There is.
I enjoyed. So now, of course, you have a family too. I guess at this point, 2 busy teenagers. Is that right?
Very much so. My eldest is just waiting for A-level results, looking for a job and things like that at the moment. So he's very much that young adult, full of independence, but you still got to be there to steer them along. And my daughter is 15. This is her kind of GCSE year coming up in school. So obviously there's the relevant tensions that come with that, and being a hormonal teen.
Right. So that's a lot to juggle. I mean, you got they have busy lives, but you're still involved, and you really have 2 careers going. So how do you work that? What's your daily schedule like? How do you get that?
You know what, people ask me this all the time, and I'm envious of people who are like, well, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I do an hour of writing, and then I go and do. I can't have a schedule like that, because my day-to-day life can be so different to week, day to day. So when I'm at work, when I'm at school, I don't have the mental capacity to write, because I'm not only a teacher, I'm part of the management. So the responsibility of that means I sometimes can't focus or think clearly when it comes to it. There are times when I will, because if I have this surge of inspiration and I'm like, no, I want to do this, I will. But in the term time, it's very rare that I'm able to write regularly on a specific day, because I either have meetings I've got after school, or I might be being mum taxi, taking my son to his training, or my daughter somewhere.
Yes.
And obviously you come home and then you've got to do your things that you do at home. So daily, it's not like the weekends, depending on the time of year. Again, if I'm not in a stressful part of school where I'm not doing assessments and reports and parent consultations and things like that, then I might open up and be able to do some writing in the weekend. But I generally tend to save that bulk writing time to when I'm on school holidays.
I get it. Yeah.
And I'm probably the only early riser in the house. So if my husband's gone to work or he's working from home, the kids, my son is quite self-sufficient. So once he is up, he does his things. My daughter is going through that teenage moment where she stays asleep long as possible.
Yeah.
So I am an early riser, so I can get up and go off and do a little bit of writing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I can imagine that at the end of the day, you would not feel inspired necessarily.
Not
So
in, not in term time, but it's
yes.
I when I teach the very young ones, so 3 to 5-year-olds they are,
Mhm.
and they, as wonderful as it is, they are mentally, emotionally, physically exhausting.
Oh yeah.
And being a woman of the age I am now as well, I'm hitting exhaustion a lot quicker than I used to. So yeah, I have to look at, you have to look at yourself as well, don't you? This is where it's really important, that self-care side of things as well. So I know not to push myself. If I push, I'm not going to write anything that I'm proud of,
Right.
and it'll just be that much more of a struggle when it comes to actually unpicking and reworking things.
Mhm.
I try to be quite a clean writer, and when I do write, I find it very hard to just verbal diary or everything out. And then
Yeah.
I'm that person who, when I do write, I write, I'll reread the chapter. If I see little things that I can change straight away, I do. And then obviously once you get to the end, you still have all the editing to do, but I can't write absolute nonsense and just leave it there because it just irks at me. I think that might be
Oh,
Virgo. I
sure.
think
Yeah.
I'm a Virgo, and I think it's probably part of that. I'm a bit of
Well, I relate to uh I mean, I'm a morning person, so I relate to that, but I also after 9, I was just joking with my son and just saying after 9:30 p.m., like I don't think anything like fully intelligent is coming out of my head or, you know. So, what inspired you to write Marriage Unarranged and then begin that series?
when I started it, there was never a series. It was just this story. And
Mhm.
I think because I was caught up in my own wedding plans and things like that, it
Mhm.
wasn't my story. But it was like, do you know what? I very rarely get to read stories about people like me,
Right.
because there wasn't that many books, or weren't that many authors at that time from an ethnic background that were widely available, and especially British Asian. So I could go and I could get books from Indians, but they still didn't reflect my
Right.
experiences or what I might have learned or seen or how my life was.
Mhm.
Because our life here in the UK as an Indian is very different to that of an Indian living in India.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be nice to have somebody, a main character, for people who I could imagine, walking down the road with or meeting at a family function and things like that. So it just came about that. Then I thought I started to look into stigmas, cultural stigmas, that
Mhm.
what would happen if this occurred to this girl, and how, I mean, with Marriage Unarranged, it's about a young lady whose engagement breaks because of uh, infidelity, basically, on her fiance's part. But how there was a time, and I think it's getting better, but there was a time when, even though something was theoretically his fault, the shame, that stain that is left on a girl, it was left on her, and he would always get away. He'd be
Mhm.
the one to be having extra brides lined up for him, but the girl was always, she's the one who this happened to. And so that started as my kind of maybe, how could she overcome this kind of stain that has been left on her and her life and her family. And then then, as I said before, I hadn't fully planned it. I just didn't know, but I knew that's going to happen. And then I wanted to bring India into it somewhere, but I wanted to
Yeah.
bring the experience of us as British Asians when we go out to India, how I see India, or
Mhm.
how somebody like me would see India. Um, and as I said, it just kind of began to flow and develop.
Yeah.
And through that, little other stigmas started to come into play again,
Mhm.
children out of wedlock, and all other things, sexuality, all sorts of stuff like that started to come into the story. And
Mhm.
when I finished this particular one, I realized that there was other characters who had good stories that could come out of what we'd already learned from the first one. and that's where the straight as a Jalebi idea came, and the third, which I'm writing now. Again, they are rooted in stigma
Yeah.
and trying to normalize situations that have just been touted as awful for people, whereas actually there's so much in life that happens to so many people, but it's just far too much hidden.
Yeah, I agree. Now, your stories take place in right at the turn of the new millennium, so 2000, and they're set in Birmingham, UK.
Yes, that's the
That's
majority
a
of
pretty big city, right? That's
it
it is.
it's like the second city in the
Okay.
UK.
All
And
right.
it's where I was born and grew up. So
Okay.
that's why because I know that place. Like, well, I did know that place. It's very different now to what it was before I moved when I got
Is it?
married.
Oh, okay.
I think everywhere changes. It's been
Yeah.
I've been married for over 20 years now, and I can't recognize the place sometimes when I go back. But it's set in places that not necessarily where I lived exactly, but places I knew and places I can describe
Mm-hmm.
well. So yes, it's there, and the thinking that is in all of that, it's very much the thinking of that time. So how people look at certain stigmas, they may have
Yeah.
changed, their ideas may have changed, for some people, but they're still very much there, which is what the feedback I get from people who've read the book, and especially young or even my age, British Asian women and men who come back and say, could totally relate to what you've just written there. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness me, yeah. Oh, I remember that kind of thing happening here. You know, so it's awoken that level of sort of that reaction of, yeah, I know what you mean. This has happened to me, or these kind of things. I remember that. I remember that type of person, or yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that has been really good for certain readers. As I said, it's nice to read about somebody I can relate to.
Yeah. One thing that I enjoyed a lot about Marriage Unarranged and Straight as a Jalebi. Am I saying that? Yeah,
Jalebi.
Jalebi. And one of the things that I really liked is that you really seem to get the dynamics between adult siblings. Because there's a camaraderie, but there's also like there's just tension and I really liked that. And I also liked that you really like as an American, learning about other cultures and the there's always, even though the younger generation of the 20 somethings are sort of pushing back about, just arranged marriages and just the pressures of their parents are putting on them and other relatives. There's always like a respect for the older generation, and it really came through, and I liked that. It gave me just like a nice warm feeling. I mean, there were disagreements and drama,
Oh.
when the marriage is or the engagement is off, a lot of discussion, and both sides of the families are react differently, and but everybody gets through it, and I just thought that really positive. It was a very positive vibe I got from it all.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah. Well, I've got a brother, younger brother,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously as brothers and sisters, you have your ups and downs, but we're very much on an up now that we're older. However, I grew up with a huge extended family. So
Mm-hmm.
even though we didn't live under the same roof, we were in each other's pockets every weekend, every time. There was always something going on, whether it was somebody getting married, somebody having a baby, there was birth, deaths, marriages. We were there all the time. And then if we weren't there all the time, with those kind of celebrations, there might have been somebody having dinner at someone's house or
Mm-hmm.
another function at the temple. So those dynamics, they've been in my life the whole time, and I've seen, like, when it comes to even like my parents, my father is the youngest of quite a few siblings, so I see his relationship with his brother and sisters. My
Mm-hmm.
mum has two brothers. The only I suppose one of the big differences between what I write and what my life is my parents were both born in Kenya. So
Yeah.
some of the things that we probably experience and see is very different to what's happening in the characters there, because my parents had to move from Kenya to here, so that and their family had already had a big change from India to Kenya, learning
Mhm.
and adapting, and then adapting from Kenya to here. So there's a bit of difference. Whereas the families that I'm writing about, they're more your first generation, come over from India. Um, so there's a slight difference in thinking and things like that.
Mhm.
However, the dynamics of family are more or less going to be there the same. You
Yeah.
know, there's always
Very
going to be that
enjoyable. Yeah.
love, but there's always going to be the friction as well. And
Hmm.
like I said, the friction's where the drama comes in, isn't it?
It is. Yes, definitely. And so in the second half of, or I guess it's the second section of Marriage Unarranged, your characters take a trip to India.
Mm.
And I really enjoyed that. It's kind of like a travelogue, and just the difference, the the challenges that they had to. It's almost like you. It seemed to me as a reading about it, you just have to kind of go with the flow when you're traveling in general. But there seemed to be, like that additional resilience to in traveling to India because of uh, uh, accommodations changing and crowds and all of that. So my question is, did you have you made a lot of trips to India and when you were
I've
younger?
made a few, yeah. When I the first ever trip I made, I was 6 months old. So please don't ask me to remember any of that because I don't. But then up until I was nearly, I think it was 21, I didn't go back because we used to, whenever we did go anywhere, we generally went back to Kenya, which is where the majority of my mum
Okay.
and dad's families
Hmm.
who were still were there. And I went back when I was 21 to India, and I went to do wedding shopping with one of my cousins.
That was my
And,
question. Yeah.
yeah, and then I also then went with my mum and my aunt to do my wedding shopping a year or so, a year or two later. So what I've written about and those experiences, they are very, very true to what
Hmm.
we felt as British Indians coming back
Right.
home. You know, the heat, the smells, the way that we're going to feel, because we're used to a very westernized, civilized experience when you go out shopping, whereas over there it is very much like any Westerner who is not used to that is going to feel the same as us in that way, in terms, you don't really go down the road to go and do your grocery shopping and find, a herd of goats or something,
Right.
just sauntering down the road, or the cows or whatever. And the shanty towns and the slums,
Mhm.
almost next door to these really wonderfully
Right.
amazing elaborate buildings. And um I mean, that is stretched even more nowadays, but that was the truth of India, of Delhi and places like that when I went, which is when the book is set.
Right.
um, the things that I write about are things that we experienced. So I do have a couple of readers from India who probably weren't even born at the time that I've set this book at. And they're like, well, that's not very realistic. But they're of that generation where they had multiplex cinemas, and they go out and about a lot more. And their way
Right.
of transport, their actual experience of life is very different
Hmm.
to 20 odd years ago, 20, 30 years
Sure.
ago. So sometimes they tried to call me out, and I'm like, well, actually, it's not different. It's exactly what that was because I've
Right.
been there and I've experienced it. And you have to remind. So did have to make sure we reworked like the blurb and everything, just to ensure that it's clear that this is when the book is set.
Yes.
Because some people, they don't read things like that very clearly, and it's like, no, you need to understand this is that it's not set now, because the novel being set now would be a very different story and
Hmm.
a very different experience. So since then, I did a couple of them. My husband's family is from India.
Hmm.
Since I got married, we've been, a few times. I've spent a month out there in one of the times as well, and experienced a different side of India, because where I don't really have much of my own family out there. My husband's family, there's a lot of their, family out there. So I've experienced a different side of India now. Uh, but there's still the same differences being a British Asian going out there.
Yes.
You know, and I think the extra layer that comes from that is there's an expectation being an Indian going back, and we as Indians going back have this almost expectation on us as well about how we should be behaving, how we should be, and sometimes you forget that actually in India, they've moved further forward than maybe our parents' way of thinking. So what we've been taught to respect, to do, not do, actually might not be the same as out there anyway. So there's a lot of conflicting sort of emotions when you do go back home, as they say. So I try to relay all of that within my story, you know, that how you do feel, you know, and the fact that you feel a bit like an outsider even though you're supposed to be coming home.
Right. Yeah.
Things are different.
Let's see. So, your novels, they include a lot of strong themes about family and relationships and marriage, but they're also a lot of fun to read. I thought that there's just like a lot of humor in there, and I just they really give you, you know, just for a reader who may not be that familiar with the Indian culture, like I really got like a very nice broad view of your life or life during that time. So my question is, have you ever written any yourself or any of your friends into your novels?
No. Do you know what? I think I've literally just wrote something on somebody else, a blog post about this on somebody else's blog about writing realistic characters. But writing a realistic character doesn't mean you write about a person you know necessarily. However, as a writer, as an author, I think everywhere you go, every person you meet, you catalogue them or their behaviours or their characteristics somewhere. And you never know, there might be an element of somebody who peeks through. But it doesn't mean you're writing about that person.
Right.
You know, I would say out of all the characters that I've written about within the Rishte series, Archie's dad is probably the one who is the closest to somebody who's real, and he's like my dad in a lot of ways. But he's not my dad. There's a lot about him that's not my dad. However, his emotions, I think his gentleness, little things like how he would take his turban off and, you know, rubbing his ears because, you know, it's been sore for the whole day, that kind of thing.
Right.
Little things like that, they're part of my dad. But he as a person, as a character, he's not my dad. My dad was a shop owner. My dad didn't come from India. My dad had a different, you know, experience. You know, but that's it. Otherwise, in others, I think you can see an element of, sometimes I don't know whether everyone else does this, I feel like in some ways you write an element of yourself in every character as well. There might be little things from each of the female characters that I've written that might reflect a bit of my experience, not necessarily of me, but of an experience I've had. And different characters that I think that they might have a facet of somebody or a shadow of somebody, but they're never a person specifically. That's
I
think that's how you can write realistic characters as well. Something you've experienced or watched, you know, or sometimes you see a part of something and it helps you develop a different characteristic or a storyline, that sort of thing. So no, never really knowingly written about a person specifically. However, I think you'll always see elements of people or characters you've met along the way.
Right.
Sometimes rearing their little heads and saying hi.
That's great. So we're going to take a little break and we'll be back in just a moment. All right, we're back. So I wanted to ask you, Ritu, about, so I really enjoyed the part in Marriage Unarranged where they travel to India to, actually that it's it's in the second book where they're getting all the accessories and the,
Yeah, yeah.
you're right. It's straight in as a Jalebi where they're ordering all the special clothing and accessories, but there's some of that in the first book too. I'm kind of mashing them together, so I apologize. But it was really, I really just enjoyed learning about the traditions and ceremonies. And so, can you tell us about your own experience? You mentioned that you traveled to do that for your own wedding, and what that was like for it.
Yeah, well, traveling to India to do shopping it's an experience unlike any other.
Right.
And I tried to recreate as much of what I saw when I went to do my cousin's shopping, as well as my own, in how I wrote certain scenes. So
Mhm.
though the shops are not actually real, the places are. So where the hotel that they stay in, this tiny part of Delhi, which is in the middle of a real shopping district, but it's not like your very posh shopping area
Mhm.
in Karol Bagh, but it's a really real area. So it is hectic, crazy, with tiny little sort of gullies and alleyways filled with little treasure troves, as well as your main road, which has lots of other shops in it. Going there, being overwhelmed by the choice that you have out there. Everything that I experienced, I wanted to try and put that flavor into what I wrote. You know, down to the things that, simplistic things, like literally how everywhere you go, they know that you're there to shop, they know you're there to spend money, and they want you to spend their money with them. So they know you're the overseas customers, and being uh, wooed almost, with food and drink as soon as you get there, and pulling out 110 outfits, to boggle your mind while you're sitting there. That's the kind of experience that you do have when you go somewhere like that. There's always somebody there, and it's very rarely female, or it wasn't at that time. It was where the male will be standing there ready to wrap a piece of fabric around himself to show you what a sari is going to look like, or a different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, let me just see what it shows you, madam. Let me show you. This is how it's going to look. And you tried that better than I could ever tie it in my life. But those kind of things is so true. And then the tiniest of places that could look like this dingy, dusty little place is filled with such treasure, literally, like
Beautiful fabrics and
fabric, but even down to the accessories. So
Mhm.
little tiny little booths, almost like tobacco booths, but they're not. They're like filled with bindis, or artificial jewelry and things like that. And there really is a market when you go further into a different part of Delhi, which is called the Hanuman Mandir area, and there is the Bangle market, and there's just just loads and loads of stalls filled, and they'll ask you, what do you want, and they'll have all these sets of bangles there. Just break them all up and create bespoke designs, with jeweled bangles and colored bangles, big, wide,
Right.
thin, and create something that you want. They're happy to do it. I mean, you just have these bangles scattered everywhere, and then you walk off with what you want, and they're left tidying everything up.
Right.
Then you go further into another area where it's as if you've stepped into, I don't know, almost like Rodeo Drive. All these designer style stores, and
Right.
very, very high end levels of store the products. So you go down to the designer route, where you might not get the same sort of level of, let me get you a nimbu bani, let me get you something to eat or something, but there's still a different reverence there.
Mhm.
um and then interspersed within all of that, you do have little elements which I tried to put into it, of the youngsters trying to be really cool out there, and how different people respond to you as an outsider coming
Mhm.
in as well. But the shopping side of it, I mean, it's just unreal. Myself, when I went, I found a magazine, an Asian bridal magazine, and I was looking through there and I never wanted to be that traditional bride, in that I didn't want to wear red, because red wasn't really my color. I didn't like red.
Mhm.
And so people had started to wear others. You had people with their fuchsias and their burnt oranges and things like that, but I decided to go for like a peachy kind of color in the end. In fact, very, very much like this kind of sort of
Mhm.
color that I wore. But I found this picture, and it was a beautiful. It was a dress. It was still in India. It was almost like having one of the two-piece outfits, the skirt and thing, but it was sewn together. Because I've heard horror stories of brides, and they get these outfits made, and like the skirt is so heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I know my cousins, when they've got married, they've had to have sort of like built-in braces, suspenders in
Mhm.
their belts to keep them up.
And you
And
mentioned something like that in your
yeah,
book. Yeah.
yeah. And there was I mean, there has been, whether they become like urban legends or whether they're real, but this story that goes around about a girl who, as she was doing the circumambulations around the holy book, that her skirt fell because it was so heavy and she didn't have
Right.
it held up. And the whole of the boys' side, apparently, this is very apparent, I'm not saying this happened, I'm not seeing it, but it's one of those stories that the whole boys' side got up and left the wedding and left her. I mean, so you've got these things people say, oh, do you
Right.
know this? Do you hear about this? So I don't
Oh.
want that to happen. So I saw this, there was like a dress, but it's like the two parts, they've been sewn together. And it wasn't full of gold, because I'm not about the bling. I like subtle. I think I'm very much like my mum like that. So I don't want something in your face. I wanted it to be comfortable, but I wanted it to be stunning as well.
Sure.
And this is exactly what this outfit's in. And that one that was in the book was like a gold kind of color. So I said to the guy, look, we went into this one shop, and they became our base, I think, in Delhi, this particular shop that we were in. And they very much did the same thing. We'd go in there, we'd just go in there for lunch, and end up picking up an extra couple of things every time we went in there, because they were just like, oh, they're here again, let's show you some more. But after the first day with there, I think my mum and my aunt between them could have done my whole shopping in that like couple of hours, because they kept on oh, this is really lovely, to have this, have this, have it. I don't need them all, I really don't. No, but they're so nice, we can do this, you can do it. So they've gone really excited, and obviously everything is beautiful, I'm not going to deny it, but I was very aware that I don't need everything, but they really wanted to do this. So I kind of let mum and my aunt have their own excitement as well.
Mhm.
And I showed him this picture, and I said, could you, do you know anywhere that could do something like this? And he looked at me and he went, you want it, I can do it. So I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, that's
So
great.
he went through, they showed us some fabrics and some colors. He said, what color do you want? What sort of thing do you want? And basically it's a lot of it's thread work and stone work that is on my outfit, my
Mhm.
wedding outfit, rather than lots of golden embroidery and everything. And literally, so he chose, and he said, I've never made something specifically like this before. So he goes, don't you worry, this is going to be one of my big things. I'm going to have it. And literally, I think he said that over sort of, we were in India for about 2 or 3 weeks in total, but
Right.
probably over sort of 10 days, and gosh, possibly some nights as well. He had his team of tailors and embroiderers working on this, and because I'd go there every day just to go and see how it was getting on. I don't know how many people, he said 25 different people working on all the different elements of the work before it even got stitched to create the actual thing. And I mean, he did a stunning job, at the end, because I didn't want a big heavy scarf, because again, that's something that I was like, I can't do that, I can't do it.
Mhm.
So it's a really delicate, beautiful net sort of scarf that he had created for me, and the actual outfit itself, it was just amazing. So what I wanted, it was there, made for me, for a fraction of the price as well. That's always a,
Yeah.
because you could have been spending thousands on it, and I think we paid about £300 for it, which
Wow.
is a big thing. So that, and then the other side of it is all that traditional element, which I do write about in the book, the different things that you need to um, take part in certain different customs that happen, and different events that happen through the wedding. And
It's not just one day, it's several.
no, it's
Yeah.
a long time. It can take as
Mhm.
long as you want, really. But one thing I did write about, which was quite a real experience in terms of the place, was there's somebody recommended this old gentleman who makes the wedding bangles. So when we went there, I included a very similar kind of scene for when Kiran goes to get her bangles, and it was this man was exactly like this. That he was renowned for making these. And in the old traditional days, these bangles, they were always made out of ivory. and obviously people don't use ivory now, so it's not.
Right.
But the way he continued to create these bangles was done with as much love as if they were still ivory, and the way he formed me, because you can buy them off the shelf everywhere, and what you find is you've got very sharp edges on each of the bangles. So when the ceremony happens, when your uncles are putting this, the girls, I always remember my cousins, we having to have bottles of either oil or moisturizer there so that they could really like caked before, otherwise they'd have, you know, the skin scraped off their on, and that's like the night before their wedding. You know, you don't want to be going into your wedding with your, you know, scarred hands. But so, you know, this guy, he literally made sure that every single bangle had a rounded edge on the inside, as well as, you know, that it matched size wise. And he started every single appointment, he would find out which religion the bride is from, because pretty much most religions in the Asian side, you know, whether Hindu or Sikh, definitely they wear these wedding bangles. And he starts by writing like the relevant holy symbol at the top of the receipt. So so he wrote Ik Onkar, which is our Sikh kind of symbol, at the top of the receipt, and then talked through what we wanted, and went through what kind of color. And I wanted to keep that as traditional as possible. I went for a lovely burgundy, which looked really nice with the outfit. But some girls go for like, it's literally the whole of their lower bangles. I didn't. I went for a simple one set on each side, and you know. And
you
then
still have your bangles?
I do. Yeah. You know, so then they made those, and then while we were there, my mum is very, and I think I've learned a lot about some of the traditions and the reasons why we do things, because of my mum has always been really interested in it, and instead of just doing things because we've always done it, she always wants to know why do we do these, you know. I even found out about the bangles. I mean, yes, they signify you're a new bride, but they're also made so they're not too loose. They've got a slight tightness about them. You have pressure points around your wrist areas, which link to your reproductive system, and people want brides to get pregnant. So, you know, little things that you probably, people don't even realize, but that was one of the reasons why they would have these tight bangles, and why it used to hurt to get them put on, because that was an element of them. So my mum very much she was in her element in this shop, because he not only just did the bangles, but there was lots of other little paraphernalia and bits and bobs, beautiful decorated stools for certain parts, certain ceremonies, and different dishes, all sorts. So, you know, she not only kind of questioned him and really dug in deep in terms of what, why, where, and when, but then she's filled up a good suitcase with extra stuff.
Yeah, that's neat. Now, did you leave with your wedding clothes, or were they shipped? Oh, okay, so they were ready in 2 to 3 weeks that you were there. That's amazing. Yeah.
Out there, you mean you can almost get anything you want done. Equally, they can take as long as they want to do things. So unless you're on at them constantly, you know, you may not leave with it. But yeah, no, I left with everything. I don't think there was anything they had to ship. The only thing that was shipped to us were the wedding cards, because we had the wedding cards done out there. But yeah, I mean, every element of the trip was an experience, and a different type of experience. Then the shopping in Delhi is really different to shopping in Bombay. And then going to the Punjab, the difference in shopping in some area in Punjab as opposed to shopping in Delhi is really different. So it helped me to then, I mean, my experiences then helped me to add an extra layer to what I was writing about. As well. But yeah, it was definitely a fun experience.
Oh, that's neat. So I want to talk a little bit about just arranged marriages, and ask you if you can talk a little bit about how that whole idea in like the year 2000 and now. So there's a little bit of a pushback against that expectation by your characters, the 20-somethings.
These things, I think, isn't it like everything? Things kind of almost come full circle. So when that was set, you were still had, yes, there's a lot of youngsters who were fighting against this find somebody for me mentality. I don't want an arranged marriage, I want to do the love marriage. This is because why shouldn't we and everything. But it's funny because coming back now, you have all these programs out there, Indian Matchmaker and things like that. Whereas now you've got youngsters who are older professionals who don't have time to find people, or
That's
they
interesting.
pass
Yeah.
their sell by date in some people's eyes, but they're like, no, I want to find the right person for me, so I'm going to engage in a matchmaker myself. It's not my parents. Whereas in the old days, it would have been your family, your aunts,
Right.
uncles, people who know you, people who collate all of their friends and families, young children's names in heart, so they know when they hit a certain age, right, I think it's time for us to start suggesting people for you. So it was very much a community effort in some respects. There was always that one person or those two people who seemed to know everybody and had suggestions constantly. And then you had that pushback, and a lot of the marriages tended to be love marriages. And it feels like I'm seeing a lot more of it, except it's an evolved version of an arranged marriage. Going back, way back, arranged marriages were such that sometimes a man and a woman wouldn't have even seen each other physically. Things were agreed when they were kids. Yeah,
Right.
you've got a daughter now, and I've got a son, so we're going to make our friendship into a family relationship, and we're going to promise to each other. So you grew up knowing you were promised to somebody else. That was one version. And then you got to the stage of, yes, being introduced to people constantly, suggested people, suitable people,
Right.
and meeting them, and this element of, sitting in a room with the whole family and then being allowed to go and talk to each other for a little while, and then coming out, and then, almost having to make quite a big decision of your life within the space of, half an hour meeting almost, and that did evolve as well to the stage of, yeah, we like each other, but we want to know each other more. So, you can go out for dinner or something once or twice, but not much more than that. You've got to make your decision because people will talk otherwise. And then again, that pushback did start to happen about people meeting somebody themselves. The love marriage aspect of things did come about. But now, like I said, it's not that. I think there's also a value in arranged marriages in that you're looking, because I think marriage very much, especially in the Asian community, you don't just marry your partner, you're two families coming together.
Yeah.
You do have to know if there's going to be a gelling of the family as well. And that's one thing when there is love marriages, that's not going to be the first thing on somebody's mind. And I'm not saying that a love marriage is the wrong way to go. I mean, my husband and I, we were a love marriage. I wasn't an arranged marriage.
Right.
But that there is a lot to be said for that almost vetting and meeting of families and minds before you actually
Right.
commit to somebody. So that, and I do think that is coming back. I mean, it's a different level of matchmaking nowadays that happens, because it's probably more led by the individual, whereas before it was the family elders who were making all the suggestions.
Right.
Whereas now you'll that the individual in question, the guy or the girl, will be more, this is what I want, this is what I'm looking for, what can you find me, and then matching people together to see how they work, whether it is going to be the right thing or not. And it's not the same push of time, like we need to know within half an hour whether you've suggested something. But then it's more like an arranged meeting, and then from that you can decide whether you're going to take it further and maybe date for a while. And sometimes it'll end up in a natural marriage, sometimes it ends up not, because they've dated each other for long enough and realized this is not what we wanted.
But that whole making suggestions, that goes on in other cultures too. And
Absolutely.
I mean, even like,
yeah,
and the younger generation, I mean, maybe they're just more involved in the process. But yeah, I mean, you're always thinking, oh, those two might go together well, or whatever. Like, there's that human tendency to try to want to connect people. So yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about Straight as a Jalebi, because that's a different story. And in this one, the brother, Ashi's brother, Sonny Gill, discovers a strong attraction to another man.
Yeah.
And there's hint of it in Marriage Unarranged, and then it's his story in the second book. So and the other man is the designer, Milan Tagore. And so this was 20 years ago. Homosexuality was starting to become much more accepted than it was, certainly compared to earlier decades. But definitely a difficult subject to discuss with family. So I thought that whole his whole really coming to understand himself, as well as telling his siblings, and that was tough, very tough. And especially because he was under pressure to marry.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole story of both Milan and Sonny and their families putting pressure on them. So do you find that this writing about it from from the year 2000 versus now, do you see a change in that in your culture?
I think there's definitely a change, not necessarily in everybody's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because the older generations will still find this a very hard sort of concept to even want to accept. But then they also say that, sort of like, you go back to India, so that third gender has always been there with the eunuchs, so you're looking at sexuality, looking at gender and stuff. So these things have always been there, but they've never been accepted. Homosexuality out there in India, I can't remember what the date was, but I mean, even at the time my book is set, it was still illegal to have a same-sex relationship at that time. Whereas now, I think what you find is youngsters have grown up with more freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and access to more of what's out there than we would have had. So if you had somebody who was questioning their sexuality 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they didn't really have very many other people or places to kind of connect with and to relate to. And you're probably more likely to think, I'm really weird. There's something wrong with me because people don't talk about this now. Whereas nowadays, you've got a lot more figures out there who are open about their sexuality and things like that, which means that I think you're finding youngsters are feeling more confident, if that's the way that they feel, that they can do it because others are the same out there. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that they might be accepted by the whole of their families as quickly or easily. However, they're probably more likely to have more friends, people around them, their age range, who are more accepting.
Right. Supportive. Yes.
So not judgmental, and I think that's a really big thing, because, it just means that people are able to be who they are.
It's your authentic self. Yeah.
And again, this is never something I set out to write about. This was what just came about because when I started that first story, it was like I said, my characters, they just keep talking to me and I'm crying out, and something was happening there. And then a couple of readers as well were like, really want to know what happens here, really want to know what happens with Bally and Kieran, really want to know what happens. And it just felt like a natural progression to go into their kind of story. And I wrote it, I didn't want to write it with a whole bunch of stereotypes supporting the story, the feeling and everything. So I wrote it, but hey, at the end of the day, I'm not a gay Asian male. So I'm never really going to know whether I'm doing justice to the story or not. So my next dilemma, once I'd done it, was, do I want to publish this and offend people especially people who are of that background. I need to find somebody to read this, I need people who can sensitivity read it, really. And then again, it was finding somebody from the right age range, the right background to read it, because I could find younger guys who are gay quite easily, but they would have the same experience of somebody
you need
previous.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a very good friend who lives in New Zealand, but he's not Indian. He's a New Zealander. And I just, because he was a real champion when I wrote Marriage Unarranged, and I just said to him, look, the subject matter is this, and I know you're a gay guy, would you read it and tell me if I'm doing right or wrong by these characters, and by the gay community? And he was like, absolutely. And then he said to me afterwards, he read it and he was really positive in his feedback, and he said, I might not be Sikh, he goes, but I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually the son of an Anglican priest. So if you can imagine them trying to accept the fact that I was gay, there was a lot of parallels in that respect.
Yeah.
So getting him to read it, that was really amazing. Thinking, okay,
it's awesome. Yeah.
Certain levels, that's great. I still would love to have somebody though who is Indian, British Asian, to read it though as well. And I had a couple of other, about 3 or 4 other author friends read purely for the perspective of a reader, and to tell me whether it makes sense. Am I going a bit off the loop with anything or not? And again, like I said, they gave me fantastic feedback, some constructive advice, and a lot of positive sort of words, which was great. And I just remember talking to somebody who I worked with, and she's read the first one, and she's always going on about how excited she is about whenever the next one comes out. And she's an Asian woman, Sikh woman as well. And I just said to her, this is my only thing now. I'd love to find a gay Asian guy who's around about, in his early 40s maybe, to read it. Somebody who actually reads, but who would be interested in reading it, to find out if I've, written realistically enough. And she went, why didn't you tell me sooner? I said, well, she goes, my brother's gay.
Oh.
And she goes, and he's quite an academic. He likes reading and stuff like that. And I said, oh my goodness, well, ask him if he would read it. I'd be thrilled, and I'd be just over the moon. And I don't even know how I'd be able to thank him, but if he would read it, then I'm yes please, basically. And she checked in with him, and he was like yes. And he even read Marriage Unarranged first before he started the second one, because he goes, I feel like I want to read it so I get a really good flow.
Sure. Yeah.
And he read it, and then he kept on sending his sister messages about what he was thinking as he was reading the first one. And in the end, she goes, I'm just going to give him your number so he can tell you directly, because when he starts reading the second one, I don't want to know, because I want to read it when it's out properly. So he did, and he fed back, and it just gave such positive feedback. Just about made me feel that I'd done a good job in terms of the sensitive side of it, and thinking about family dynamics and those kind of feelings, because he'd been through it all.
Right.
Like, he might be open now, but at that time it was a really tough time of his life when he was at that sort of age, battling with his own feelings and sexuality and expectations of everybody out there. So and I think that for me, that was like key. I'm so happy that I had him on board to help me, because I don't know if I would have been confident when it went out.
That's really fantastic. Yeah. So before I forget, your covers are beautiful, and I wanted to, do you have copies with you that you can show?
I do indeed. So that's my cover for Marriage Unarranged. And it kind of has the bangles there, and it has a camera, photos, because there's links to the characters and things that go on within the story in there. And then the straight as a Jalebi character one is this here.
Yeah.
So the 2 different couples polymarriage, but if you notice, the 2 men are actually looking at each other.
I see that. Yeah.
And there's a few jalebis and stuff, floating around.
Which is it's a confectionery. Is it?
It's an Indian sweet, which is right. It's like fried sugar syrup, but it's all curly, so it's definitely great.
Yeah.
Play on words there.
Yeah, that's great. So I just wanted to ask you to can you give us a hint about book 3 It's the title is In God's Hands, correct?
You can see back there as well as
Oh, there it is. Yes, there's your
that's my
what do you
story.
call that? It's like a plot board or a
Yeah, my little storyboard where I tried to
storyboard. Yeah.
plan how I would like things to go. But it's part of the same series, and now we're looking at Archie's other brother, Bally, and his now wife. You know, they get married in the second one. They get together in the first one, so it's looking at them. And since I started going into looking at taboos and stigmas, it's to do with infertility.
Okay.
And you know, the pressure for starting a family and how it's conceived within our society when that bride hasn't, you know, fallen pregnant within a year of being married, or, you know, what happens emotionally. And this one is a little more closer to home in terms of its content, because we went through our struggles. And again, it's not my story, but it's
Right.
something that I've lived through. I've lived through a much more positive experience than a lot of people have, though. You know, even though we had our struggles, we had our family support all the way through. I didn't feel the pressures that some people do, you know, to be pregnant and to have a child. You know, we wanted it to happen, and it took its time, and it did. However, there's a lot of women out there who, even to this day, it's not only the pressure to have a child, it's the pressure to have a boy.
Yeah.
As well. So for this, because it's not my story per se, I've done more interviews as well with people who have been through that and are going through it right now, and avenues they've taken, the way that, you know, things people have said to them, the way people's behavior towards them has changed sometimes as well. You know, I've tried to, I want to make it a story that can be relatable on different levels to different people, and make it obvious it's not my story. You know, however, it's a topic very close to my heart.
Yeah. Now, when can we get our hands on that?
At the moment, the hope is June next year.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's perfect.
Let me get it written though first. Yeah.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's very purposely done. So like all three of them have come out in June. So last year, June, they said it'd be nice because it's got that kind of wedding-y vibe to it, even though it's not about a wedding.
Right.
It's wedding season starting. Then Jalebi came out in June because that's also Pride Month.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And June is also international. It's infertility month as well. So they thought it would be a nice time to get it out there. Great. So all being well, and I've actually got it written, because I have had a bit of a mental block. I have to say, writer's block recently, just because life has been a bit crazy. Work has been mad and everything. Now I'm at a break and I sit down to write, and it hasn't been flowing in the same way. But like I said, I've got all my ideas. They're all there. Right. It's a case of getting it down on paper, but I'm too much of a perfectionist to just write garbled nothing and then try and fix it. So, but yeah, that's the plan. June, approximately next year, and I've started to I've made ideas for covers, but then obviously my publisher will then do their that one was more or less all me. I found all the images. I love that. Yeah. And the first one was actually designed by a cover designer who I'd employed when I published myself, and my publisher, Spellbound Books, they really liked that cover and said, you know, unless you really want us to do something different, you know, can we keep it? I was like, I'm more than happy, because I love the cover. So now my third one, I've got my ideas. Now it's a case of them making it a reality, I suppose.
Right. And those two covers complement each other, you know, I think.
We thought it was nice to have that sort of the graduated colours as well. And
yes, I like it. Yeah.
And that element of similarity with the figures on there as well. So yeah, that's that.
Great. So now how can readers find you online?
I'm everywhere, I think. If you were to just write Ritu Bhathal, you'll see me. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I even venture on TikTok, though not very often, and I have my website and my blog as well. But I'll give you the link tree.
Yes.
Which anybody fancies it. It's got the buy links for the books and for all of the various different places. Twitter, which is now X, and Thread, and all of that stuff. It's all on there. So
that's, you know, great. Yeah.
I'll
be putting that in the description so you can all connect with Ritu that way. So thank you so much for coming on with me today. I had a great time. I really learned a lot, and it's fun getting to know you a little bit better in person. So that was really fun. Thank you all for watching. And please keep a lookout for more interviews like this. And we will talk to you again soon.